was one of the, Imam Hassan alayhi made a peace treaty with Muawiyah. One of the conditions was that you do not give leadership to your children, which he did. So he broke that treaty. Now, why was Yazid so much worse than Muawiyah? What was it that Yazid did or didn't do that made the difference? Where an Imam had to stand up and fight instead of was allowed to not. The difference is this: Muawiyah, with all of the bad things he did, with all of the negative things that he did, with all of the harm that he caused the Muslim Ummah, Muawiyah pretended, or on the outside, to be a believer. He would go in front of people and pray. He would fast. He would not commit sins in the general public. Who knows what he did behind closed doors? But in the general public, he wouldn't. Whereas Yazid did not care. Yazid was known as someone who drinks alcohol, gambles, all kinds of terrible things in the open. And because the Islamic leader, this was the first time that someone came and took over leadership of the Islamic Ummah who was a faqih. This is the first time. And Imam Hussein had to stand up to that. He couldn't sit down and allow that to happen. Because if he did, Islam would be destroyed. The people would start to follow Yazid and follow in his actions, and they would forget all about Islam. Remember I said a few days ago, a delegation came and met with Yazid. And when they met with him, they went back to their city. What did they say? How did they describe Yazid? They said he's a person who drinks, who gambles, who commits adultery with mothers and daughters, who doesn't even pray. This is how they found the leader of the Muslim Ummah. And if someone is of that nature, everyone has to stand up to them. So Imam Hussein alayhi salam had to stand up. Now, every night also, what we try to do at the end of the speech before the Musab is we try to show how this could be brought into our lives. We see how in the past, why it was so necessary for Imam Hussein alayhi salam to rise up for these reasons. We see that. But what does that mean for us today? Do we just take this knowledge and add it to the enormous amount of knowledge we have in our heads and not change our lives at all? No. What we're supposed to do is we're supposed to listen to this, put it into our heart, and make it change us. So one of the things that we could do is we could stand up for truth, stand up for Islam. We could fight falsehood, fight things that are against Islam. I'll give you two small little examples, very small, and then we'll move on, inshallah. First one against falsehood. One instance of falsehood, one instance of falsehood, a sin, is music. I want to talk a little bit about that. Now, music, we know, of course, in English, the word music is different than the Arabic word. So we could say in English that there's halal music and haram music. Right? So we're talking about haram music. And if someone has questions, what's halal and what's haram, you can ask that later, inshallah, I'll explain that. But music, there is definitely haram music. Now we have a couple of hadith that I read about the life of Imam Waqar. Sorry. Alhamdulillah, it was good to give a salah for Imam Waqar, but it's about the life of Imam Mustafa. Now, we all know that Imam Mustafa was imprisoned for a large portion of his life, for I think it was about 14 years. And it was very difficult prison. Prisons, at least probably in the United States, I don't know how it is in England, but they're a lot better than what his prison was like. It was so bad that he was starved. He became very, very thin. So thin that it was said that one time one of the guards opened the door and he was under a blanket and they couldn't even tell that he was in the room. Because He was so thin they couldn't even see a person underneath the blankets. That's how terrible these conditions were. And that's a musibah in and of itself. Now, one time he was granted what's called house arrest, where you're taken out of the prison, you're put in a home, but you can't leave the home. Right? It's house arrest. He was put there. The neighbor that he had played music. The neighbor that he had was a musician, and he would play music. When Imam Qasim found that out, he said, I want to be taken back to prison. I don't want to live next to someone where I have to hear music. Allah. It's worse for me for music to come into my ears than for me to be in that prison. This is one thing that I read about this man. Another thing was a hadith from him, where it's narrated that he would describe some of the punishments in Barzakh. We know Barzakh, after we die, which everyone will die, and we should always be remembered of that. We should always remember we will die, and we're going to be answerable for our actions. One of the punishments that we will find in Barzakh, which is the place that we go to before the Day of Judgment, after death, before the Day of Judgment. And we're either rewarded or punished there, depending on our actions. One of the punishments is if you listen to music, melted glass will be poured in your ears. And you can imagine how that would feel. I don't even think, well, you can't imagine, but you can try to picture. Now, why is it so, what is it about music that's so detrimental? Why is it such a big sin? There's a book called Greater Sins. It's in English. Hopefully a lot of you have this book. It's online as well.